Hello everyone! In today's video, we will be sharing a compilation of different ways to do embossing. Embossing is a technique that creates a raised design on a material, and it can be done in different ways, such as cold embossing, where the relief is made by pressure, or hot embossing, which requires ink, special powders, and a heat gun. Let's start with cold embossing. As mentioned earlier, cold embossing involves applying pressure, for which we will use a die-cutting machine. One option is to use an embossing folder that has engraved designs on the inside. Insert the paper into the folder and pass it through the big shot. When you take it out, you can see that the design is imprinted, raised on one side and recessed on the other. You can choose whichever side you prefer for your project. You can also use your dies for embossing. For this, you need the embossing magic mat and a die-cutting machine. The embossing magic mat is a silicone base that allows you to imprint the die on the paper without cutting it. It comes in both large and small sizes. You can emboss either size depending on the effect you want. A stencil can also be used for embossing along with the embossing magic mat. Place the base plate, a methacrylate plate, the embossing magic mat, the paper, and the stencil. Since the stencils are thin, you'll need to add extra thickness for pressure, so we will use a couple of pieces of cardboard. Pass it through the big shot and you can see how the design has been imprinted. Another easy way to make an engraving is to use a Burin. This tool has a small ball at the tip. By applying pressure with this ball, you can mark the paper without damaging it. You can create simple lines designs with help of a scoring board or a trimmer. Just score the lines as you would for folding, but without actually folding the paper. For more detailed designs, you can use a stencil and trace the design onto the paper with the Burin, placing a soft base underneath, like our embossing magic mat. Now let's move on to hot embossing. You'll need embossing ink, which is usually transparent. Any slow-drying ink will also work. You'll also need embossing powder, which is not the same as glitter. This powder sticks to the ink and melts with heat. And finally, a heat gun, with which we apply heat to the powder to melt it. Unlike a hairdryer, a heat gun emits air at a lower power but a higher temperature. A regular hairdryer would not melt the powder. Instead, it would blow it away. As extras, you can use the anti-static pad, which prevents the powder from sticking outside the inked area, and a funnel to collect the excess powder and return it to the jar. The most common way to do embossing is with a stamp. Ink the stamp with embossing ink and stamp it onto your surface. While the ink is still wet, sprinkle the embossing powder over the design. Using the funnel, recover the excess powder and return it to the jar, so nothing is wasted. Now the powder is adhered to the stamped design. The next step is to apply heat with the heat gun. You'll know it's ready when the color changes. As you can see, the design is now embossed. This technique can be applied on surfaces that resist heat, such as paper, cardboard, vellum, wood, or photos, being careful not to overheat. However, a stamp is not always necessary. You can also apply the ink using a stencil and follow the same steps as before to emboss the stencil design. You can even apply the ink directly onto the paper, either in the corners or the center. In the first case, we can use it to give a touch to our tag, for example. For central applications, you can die-cut embossed pieces. Here's a link to another video where you can find more ideas for hot embossing. We hope this video has been helpful, and we encourage you to practice the different embossing techniques. In the description, we'll leave you the link to all the materials. Let us know in the comments if you found it useful and if you use embossing in your projects. See you in the next video.